In 2014, on an 800-year-old estate in County Meath that almost nobody outside Ireland has ever heard of, the 21st Baron of Dunsany did something his neighbors couldn't forgive. He shut a gate, and then he refused to open it, no matter who showed up asking. Some of them showed up with rifles. We'll get to that. For 6 centuries, his family had run this land the way every family around them ran theirs. Cattle, sheep, and game pulled off 750 acres of some of the richest soil on the island. He walked away from all of it. The local farmers called it madness. The hunting clubs treated it as a personal insult. Irish conservation experts quietly assumed it would take 100 years to show anything at all. They were wrong on the timeline by about 90 years. A decade later, the numbers are in, and they come from Birdwatch Ireland and the European Rewilding Network, not from the man himself. Bird counts on the rewilded ground climbed 35%. Insect populations doubled in 5 years. The corncrake, the red kite, the snipe, the peregrine falcon, the barn owl, all of them came back on their own, uninvited. And a great spotted woodpecker, a bird that hadn't bred anywhere in Ireland since at least the 1700s, built a nest in a forest barely 10 years old, the first ever recorded in the history of County Meath. By year 10, this had become the largest private rewilding project on the island, and the first Irish project ever admitted to the European Rewilding Network. Here's the strange part. What this Baron did isn't restoration. It's almost the exact opposite of it. And the tool that made it work wasn't a drone, or a lab-grown seed, or a multi-million euro forestry scheme. It was so simple it sounds like a punchline, and I promise I'll tell you exactly what it is. But if I told you now, you wouldn't believe it did all this. You need the rest of the story first. You need to understand how a country famous for being green managed to lose 99% of its native forest, and how one decision, made by one man on one morning, started undoing damage that took 6,000 years to build. 6,000 years ago, 80% of Ireland was woodland, oak, ash, hazel, alder, Scots pine, a canopy so unbroken that a squirrel could supposedly cross the whole island without ever touching the ground. Sit with that image for a second, because it's the exact opposite of the island in your head. No patchwork of green fields, no stone walls, just forest, horizon to horizon. By 1900, nearly all of it was gone. There was no single catastrophe. It was thousands of small choices stacked across millennia. Stone Age clearings for hunting camps, medieval livestock crowding out the wild grazers, the British Navy hauling away Irish oak by the shipload, though the historians who've looked closest argue that by the 1700s, Irish landowners were felling just as much themselves, because pasture and firewood simply paid better than trees. Mobile sawmills mopped up the rest in the 1800s. By 1925, forest cover was down to a single percent. 1%. A country that had been a forest was now, essentially, a lawn. That collapse took more than trees with it. Piecing together old surveys, ecologists count dozens of vanished moths, beetles, fungi, and ground-nesting birds, and the great spotted woodpecker gone in near silence while almost no one noticed. Nobody held a funeral, nobody even wrote it down at the time. The bird just stopped, and the country moved on. What replaced the forest is the Ireland we know now. 70% of the country is farmland, 90% of that is grass. There are 7 million cattle for just over 5 million people. The postcard green landscape people photograph from the air is, ecologically speaking, a protein factory kept trimmed to the ground. This is the estate Randall Plunkett inherited in 2011 at 28. Plunkett did not fit the part. Born in New York, schooled abroad, he'd spent his 20s trying to make horror films rather than run a Norman castle. His terriers have names like Tiny and Butthead. His wardrobe runs to death metal. By every visible measure, he was the last man you'd expect to hold the title, which made it stranger still, because his own ancestor, Sir Horace Plunkett, had helped invent modern Irish agriculture in the 1800s under the slogan, "Better farming, better business, better living." His family had spent generations on the productive edge of Irish land, and here was the heir about to do the reverse. In 2014, Plunkett went vegan, read enough climate science to be frightened, and came across a word, Rewilding. His insight was almost literary. The land, he decided, wasn't dead. It was preserved. Irish soil has a talent for keeping things intact without showing it. The bogs hold leather, wool, even human bodies nearly perfectly for 2,000 years because cold, acidic, oxygen-starved peat simply won't let things rot. From what ecologists understand about long-dormant seeds, the ground under Dunsany's pasture works on the same logic. Seeds still waiting in the soil. Fungal networks still alive under the grass. Birds still passing overhead every season, still dropping fresh seed. The forest hadn't been destroyed. It had been buried. And the thing about buried isn't the same as dead. Buried can be dug back up. The grass on top wasn't there because the land wanted grass. It was there because, for 800 years, something had been eating every seedling that dared climb past ankle height. Think of it like a vegetable garden with a goat living inside the fence. You can buy the finest seed, fertilize, water, do everything right, and the goat eats every sprout before it reaches your knee. The seed was never the problem. The goat was. For 8 centuries, Dunsany had goats, 1,200-pound ones, in the shape of cattle and sheep. So Plunkett didn't ask what to plant, he asked what to stop doing. And in 2014, he opened the gates and let the animals out. Then everything went wrong. The money bled out first. Cattle income, sheep income, hunting leases, timber, all surrendered at once, with no government grant to cushion any of it. The hunters who'd walked these woods for free for generations showed up furious. Plunkett has said he was threatened, intimidated to his face by men holding rifles in his own fields. He calls those years, flatly, going to war. 3 years in, the woods still looked like nothing. The locals had a name for him. The experts repeated their verdict, 100 years maybe, before anything meaningful. Picture it from his side, the money gone, the neighbors hostile, the land visibly doing nothing, and every qualified person telling you you're wrong. That should have been where the story ended. Instead, he kept the gate shut 1 more year. And that was the year the land started answering back. This is the piece most people get backwards. The conventional way Ireland reforests is to take a state grant and drill tens of thousands of saplings into rows, usually Sitka spruce, which isn't even native. The forest cover figure on the spreadsheet goes up, but what's actually standing there is closer to a Christmas tree farm than a wild wood. Dunsany ran the opposite trial: no saplings, no grant, no spruce, no rows. And what unfolded inside the fence is one of the best understood processes in modern ecology, and watching it happen in order is the best part. First, the grass grew tall. Wildflowers no one had logged in the area for decades pushed up through the meadow. Then the thorny pioneers arrived, carried in by thrushes eating berries and dropping the seeds as they flew. Bramble first, then blackthorn and hawthorn. Most people see bramble and call it a weed. But bramble is a nursery. A jay buries an acorn deep inside a thicket. The acorn sprouts. And now, any deer that wants that seedling has to shove its face through inch-long thorns to reach a single leaf. The deer gives up. The little oak survives its first winter, then its 10th. And by the time it's tall enough to be safe, the bramble that shielded it dies back in the shade of the new canopy. The weed protected the tree, then bowed out once the tree no longer needed it. The forest finishes itself. Ecologists call this passive rewilding, the same mechanism behind the famous Knepp estate in England and low-intervention projects from Britain to Belarus. There's one number the textbooks tend to skip though. A native Irish oak might put on 10 meters in its first decade, but real maturity, the kind of ancient tree that supports over 300 other species, takes about a century. The full lifespan runs from 500 to 1,000 years, which means everyone visiting Dunsany today is reading the first page of a 500-page book. Which raises a fair question. If the rewilded land earns nothing, how does any of this survive? 3 streams keep it going. The remaining acreage is still farmed by tenants. The castle earns money as a film location, and Plunkett runs his own post-production company out of a converted wing. and every commercial client who shoots there is contractually obliged to donate a tree to the reserve. The experts had said 100 years. The real returns showed up inside 10 and not as a slow drift. As a cascade. Bird numbers up 35%, verified externally. The corncrake, locally extinct across most of the country, recorded again. The red kite, wiped out of Ireland by the 1900s and only recently reintroduced elsewhere, finding its own way to the estate. Snipe, peregrines, barn owls, back, unasked. Insects doubled within 5 years. Camera traps caught stoats, hedgehogs, and pine martens. The pine martens matter more than they sound. They hunt gray squirrels, the North American invader that's been shoving out Ireland's native red squirrel for over a century. Where the pine marten returns, the red squirrel comes back with it. Nobody engineered that. One predator walked back in, and a species most people assumed was doomed got a second chance. The system had started to police itself. Then otters turned up in the river running through the estate. Plunkett says none had been seen there in his entire lifetime. And finally, the woodpecker, the bird the deforestation of the 1700s and 1800s had erased. The first modern breeding pair in Ireland was confirmed in County Down in 2006, and the species has been spreading west ever since. The first ever recorded in the whole history of County Meath was documented by Niall Hatch of Birdwatch Ireland in the Young Woods at Dunsany. 3 centuries of absence ended in a forest that grew because a man stopped mowing. Plunkett says that since 2014, he's averaged roughly 1 new returning species every year. 1 arrival every 12 months for over a decade. The peat had held the memory. Once the pressure lifted, the memory dug itself back out. None of this is because Ireland is magic. It's because the Irish climate, mild, wet, heavy with clay, is one of the easiest places on Earth to regrow a forest. Run the same experiment on a dry Texas hillside or the stripped subsoil of arid Pakistan, and it wouldn't move nearly this fast. Dunsany is what happens when a landscape that already wants to be a forest is simply allowed to become one again. And if you want proof, don't look at the place. Listen to it. Go to Ireland in late April or early May, drive an hour northwest of Dublin, and stand at the estate's edge before dawn. If you can't make that trip, the principle works anywhere. A rewilded patch meets an intensively farmed one. Find that boundary in late spring and get there before the sun. On the pasture side, you'll hear maybe a handful of crows, 3 or 4 species at most, the standard soundtrack of 90% of rural Ireland at dawn. On the other side of 6 feet of wire, you're in a different country. Wrens, blackbirds, tits, thrushes, robins, warblers, redstarts, and the deep drumming of the woodpecker moving through the canopy. Reporters from The Guardian, The Irish Times, RTE, and France 24 all reached for the same word to describe it: loud. But it isn't loud, it's normal. The pasture is the anomaly, engineered for silence. You've just spent your whole life on the quiet side of that fence and never knew it. For anyone who already follows rewilding, it's worth separating Dunsany from Knepp in England. Knepp uses free-roaming herbivores as stand-ins for extinct wild grazers, and those animals are eventually slaughtered for meat. Plunkett rejected that completely. He calls his version vegan rewilding, no reintroduced herds, no killing. What's growing behind that fence is about as close to a pure subtraction experiment as lowland Irish ecology has ever run. Not everyone in Irish conservation agrees it's the best approach. The state's agricultural bodies have long backed active planting, on the logic that neat rows deliver usable forest faster than waiting for one to arrive on its own. The argument isn't whether Dunsany works. It's whether it works fast enough to matter at the scale the island needs. Here's the 11-year record in plain terms. 750 acres pulled out of livestock and hunting. Bird species up 35%. Pollinators doubled within 5 years. Corncrake, red kite, snipe, peregrine, and barn owl all confirmed back. Pine martens and otters re-established. The first great spotted woodpecker ever recorded in County Meath, confirmed by Birdwatch Ireland. The first Irish project admitted to the European Rewilding Network. The price? One man, one decision, 3 lost income streams, a stack of threats, and a forest that won't reach full maturity until somewhere around the year 2114. Now, the objection you're probably already forming. Sure, it works when you're a baron who inherited a castle and 1,600 acres. It doesn't scale to a farmer with 100 hectares and a mortgage. Partly fair, without the castle, the film income, and the tenant rents, the project would have collapsed by year 3. But the biology underneath isn't aristocratic. The European Rewilding Network lists dozens of working projects under 50 acres using this exact passive method. What scales here isn't the title or the castle, it's the closed boundary. Then the harder question. That gate the whole village wanted open? It's still only shut because one man decided so. Plunkett has a daughter, a stepdaughter, and a brother who's heir presumptive. The forest won't mature for another century, which means whoever inherits Dunsany gets a half-built ecosystem and complete legal freedom to do whatever they like with it. Rewilding isn't protected by law in Ireland. The cattle could come back, the hunting leases could come back, the lawnmowers could come back. The whole experiment lives or dies on whether the next person keeps that boundary closed. So this isn't really a finished restoration. It's an inheritance argument running slowly in oak. Almost every restoration project on the planet starts by asking what to add. Dunsany started by asking what to remove: livestock, hunting, mowing. Take those 3 pressures off the land, and 800 years of buried ecological memory begins to surface on its own. The forest hadn't vanished. It had been waiting under the lawn the whole time. The Baron's real contribution wasn't engineering, or science, or money, or effort. It was a single decision. He closed a gate the whole village wanted open, walked back to his castle, and let the woodpecker find its own way home. If the mechanics of reversing centuries of ecological damage interest you, subscribe. Because there are more of these: desert valleys revived by a single family of beavers, roadside meadows rebuilt just by switching off the mowers, coastlines saved by one overlooked shellfish. The engineering behind every one of them is just about the same, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.